Grace, peace, and welcome to Podcast of the Wills, a podcast that treats Star Wars like a sacred text. My name is Nick Milkey. We are 2 days away from Star Wars Day, and I cannot contain my excitement. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to get an Obi-Wan Kenobi teaser trailer. Are we going to get a Cassian Andor teaser of some sort? Are we going to get... I don't know what we're going to get. I'll tell you what we are going to get. We're going to get Bad Batch for sure. That's going to drop. The first episode is coming out on Tuesday, and then we'll go to, I think, regular Friday episodes. It's very exciting. There's going to be toys, things that I can't afford being released, making me wish that I had more space for more collectibles, which I don't have. But that's okay because it's our own little nerd Star Wars holiday. And as a result of Tuesday being Star Wars Day, we decided to make the show a little bit bigger tonight. And so I'm going to get into that in a minute with our guests. We have 2 guests tonight, so it's like double the show, 2 for the price of 1. You're all welcome. But at the top of the show, I need to get a couple of things taken care of. First and foremost, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we had a special pop-in from Podcast of the Wills co-founder and co-host Steve Renaud. Steve has been out of pocket for a while now, working on a doctorate. His wife has been pregnant with their second child, work. He just had to step away, but he's still a big part of the show. And he popped in a couple weeks ago to say, hey, on a Sunday night. Well, Steve and Olivia had their baby on Monday morning. And so we are excited to welcome sweet baby Ennis Hartley to the Podcast of the Wills family, another young Padawan joining us. And we are excited for them to get home from the hospital soon. I know they're doing well. They just had to spend a couple extra days. So congratulations to Steve and Olivia on that exciting news. The second thing that I'm excited about, and as I mentioned, Star Wars Day is Tuesday, May the 4th. If you're watching this show and you don't know about May the 4th, I don't know how to help you. Because if you're here, odds are it's been circled on your calendar. And so there's lots of promotions, lots of different things going on. Well, I want to throw a special shout out to Starward Whiskey, which is an Australian whiskey company. And my cousin Joel, who lives in Memphis, shout out to cousin Joel. He sent me a text last Saturday that said, or tagged me actually on an Instagram post, that this company was doing a contest. And I like whiskey and I like Star Wars. And he said, this is right up our alley. And so they were doing contest entries to win a whiskey tasting for Star Wars Day with their whiskey. Well, what do I know? On Monday, I found out that I won. And so in the mail this week, I got this nice little box with 5 1-ounce whiskey samples. And on Tuesday evening, as a way to celebrate Star Wars Day, I get to participate in a virtual Zoom whiskey tasting where they'll go through each one, talk about how it's made, what the tasting notes are, all that kind of stuff. So it's never a bad day when whiskey shows up in the mail, and it's an even better day when whiskey shows up in the mail and it's somehow connected to Star Wars. So I really won the jackpot. So I just wanted to send a shout out to Starward Whiskey, to Jake, and also the Key in the Lake podcast, which is an awesome whiskey and bourbon related podcast, which is something that I'm into a lot, whiskey and podcasting. So can't go wrong there either. So shout out to those guys. Thanks for letting me win that. And I look forward to participating on Tuesday evening in that tasting. So the third thing before we get to our guests, because I'm excited to start talking to them, I want to shout out our friend Matt. And I know Matt is in the live chat right now. I've met Matt through some of the other Star Wars podcasts I follow, the Beyond the Blast Doors Network shows. Sometimes he's known as Matt from Enid. Sometimes he's known as Matt, the guy who's really upset about what Ben Solo did to his father. But Matt is an all-around good guy. He loves to Photoshop people's heads onto funny pictures and just be an active, involved person in this Star Wars fandom and this Star Wars community. So I was at work on Tuesday, I think it was, and he sent me a message on Twitter and he said, hey, are you busy? And I said, well, I'm at work. And he said, well, when you have a few minutes, send me a message. So I messaged him back and I said, what's going on? And he said, this is for you as a thank you for doing your show, always being a positive part of the Star Wars community. And I have to say that my jaw dropped. I was excited because Matt got me a cameo video. And I have seen cameo videos before. I've seen, when people get those. But he got me a cameo video from not only a show that I really love. I spend a lot of time on this show talking about how much I love Star Wars Rebels and how much I feel like Rebels is some of the best new Star Wars storytelling that they have done in the Disney era. So it's no secret that how much I love Rebels. So Matt got me a cameo from Taylor Gray, Ezra Bridger himself, and I can't thank Matt enough for that, but I thought I would play it for you guys on the show tonight because it is so fun. So I'm going to get my mug out of the way just for a second, and I want y'all to check this out.
Hey Nick, this is Taylor Gray, Ezra Bridger from Star Wars Rebels, Spectre 6 transmitting from the Ghost, myself and the entire Ghost crew, that is Kanan, Zeb, Hera, Sabine, Chopper. I know I should have said you first, and Chopper. We all want to reach out to you and say congrats on all the success of the podcast of the Wills. Thank you for being a positive spark or a spark of positivity in the Star Wars community. And Ezra has a line that I would like to add as well, which I think we all can get behind and agree with, which is, I want to become the Jedi you see in me, the one I don't always see in myself. And I just find that to be a very important line. It's cool that your friend Matt reached out about that line, that it connects with purpose and responsibility, especially in the world that we're all in. But in Star Wars and in Rebels particularly, it is so much about the character of Ezra and who we're expected to be, and how we see ourselves. And sometimes it's about how other people see us as opposed to our own insecurities or fears. And so I hope that your podcast continues to succeed and do so well. And I hope you become the Jedi that everyone sees you to be, and that you know you can possibly become. So I hope it is an amazing year ahead. You continue following the light side. Thank you for being a part of the Star Wars universe and Star Wars family, and I hope it is an awesome year. Congratulations on all the success. And remember, may the Force be with you always. See you.
I can't thank Matt enough. I got that. I was in my office on Tuesday. I watched that message and my jaw just dropped. It was so nice. It was so kind. It was so thoughtful that he thought of me. He knows how much I love Rebels. I should have known he was up to something because he did message me a week or two ago and said, "Hey, what's your favorite Ezra Bridger quote?" And I gave him the one about, "I hope to be the Jedi you see in me, the one I don't always see in myself." I've always loved that quote and that part of Ezra's struggle as he's trying to become a Jedi and learn from Kanan. And so for him to fit that into that message, like I said, I should have known Matt was up to something, but Matt is such a good guy. And I can't thank you enough for your kindness, your generosity, and for being a part of the podcast of the Wills family. So shout out to you, Matt. I didn't do a cocktail for the show tonight, but I do raise my glass to you. Matt Harrington, you're a champ. Thank you so, so much for that kindness. So now we're going to get to the guests, because this is what makes this show great, is I have really awesome people who I haven't figured out why yet, but these really awesome people keep agreeing to come on this show, talk to me, hang out, talk about Star Wars, and I'll never stop being grateful for that. So I have not one, but two guests tonight. And here's where I was. This is where my headspace was getting ready for this show, thinking about this. Traditionally, and I will be the first to admit, I am not a comic book expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have always been aware that typically the first Saturday in May is what is considered Free Comic Book Day. And it's a comic book holiday created a few years ago in the comic industry. Not only, I think, to probably recruit new comic book readers, but to reward, folks who always go to their comic shops. And so comic book companies will put out special editions or stuff that they can give away. And so I knew that was supposed to be yesterday, May the 1st. Well, I also knew that tonight would put us 2 days away from May the 4th, Star Wars Day. So I thought, what a perfect confluence of comic books and Star Wars to celebrate those two things today on this show. So as I got closer and I started kind of tweeting about that and talking about that, I thought I should look it up and make sure that yesterday was actually Free Comic Book Day. It wasn't. It's listed on their freecomicbook.com website that it is normally the first Saturday in May, but for whatever reason, it's going to be in August this year. I don't know if that's pandemic related. I don't know where the change came from. So a little bit of false advertising on my part, but I think I have two awesome guests that will make up for that right away. So we're still going to roll with it and pretend like yesterday was Free Comic Book Day. My first guest was on the show exactly 30 days ago. He is a returning all-star, as in the parlance of his show. They have returning all-stars, guests that come back on. My guest is the host of Star Wars Minute, which, as I have said many times, is the first Star Wars podcast that I ever listened to. I really love. I've been with these guys, listening to them for a long time. He also hosts the Godfather Minute. He's kind of one of the godfathers of the movies by minute podcast genre. Has kind of helped get that going. There are so many different movies that are connected to that. But that's not all. He's not just a podcaster. He is an author of things like Box Office Poison, Tricked, Our Expanding Universe, graphic novels. He's an artist and an illustrator, and he's great with puns. And that's one of my favorite things is he's an all-around good guy, and he was willing to come back a second time and be a part of the show. So I'm excited to welcome back Alex Robinson.
Hello there. Oh, you're embarrassing me with that intro again. Too kind.
It's all deserved. It's all deserved. And most importantly, you came back after doing this one time.
Sure,
so
I do deserve a lot of credit for that. So
we're going to give it to you all night long. How are you, man?
I'm doing all right. And I got nice weather here in Portland. Finally, it's springtime. So happy about that. Podcast chugging along. Having some good guests lately.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Well, it was a great week this week. When you were on a month ago, I had done the math on, what was going on. I feel like as I listened, especially this week, being extra attentive because I knew you were going to be on, I made mental notes of things like, oh, that's funny. I'm going to bring that up on Sunday night. I've already forgotten all those things, and also realized that, your proximity to when you recorded that may make that a little bit fuzzy too. So I'm not going to put anybody on the spot.
Right. Yeah. Well, we do record the show every morning, but
every morning live.
It is right. Sunday now, so
That's right. That was 2 whole days ago.
I
can't expect you to remember all that
with our guest, Jordan.
That's right.
Somebody or
yeah, whatever that guy's name was.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for being here. Thanks for coming back.
My pleasure. Happy to talk Star Wars. I still seldom get an opportunity.
It doesn't happen for you, so I'm just helping a brother out.
Right.
Well, my second guest tonight, and another reason why I'm excited to do this show, is also a returning Podcast of the Wheels All-Star. The difference is the last time I had this guest on, we didn't have this version of Podcast of the Wheels. We didn't have the live stream. It was just an audio podcast, which we still do. We still put the audio version out on Monday mornings. But my guest is Alex Segura. Alex is the author of Poe Dameron Freefall, and I was actually really lucky to have Alex on right when the book came out. Gosh, that's been almost 2 years ago now. I think it was before pandemic. And I may be wrong about that. I'll get corrected in a minute. It's been a minute. So Alex was on to talk about that, but he's also the author of the Pete Fernandez Mystery Series. He is one of the co-presidents of Archie Comics. He's written comics like The Black Ghost, and I believe he's also involved in a new comic book with NPR, which we'll get him to talk about here coming up in a little bit. So I am very, very thankful to also welcome back Mr. Alex Segura.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Dude, thank you so much for coming and hanging out again.
I am ready to talk some Star Wars.
well, how are things in New York City for you today?
They're okay. I mean, the kids are asleep, so all is quiet.
That's right. Well, we'll try to keep it down so we don't wake them up. Cause too much ruckus.
That would derail everything.
That would derail everything. Well, I have with you guys here. I have a couple of housekeeping items up top before we get into some of our conversations tonight. And, it's always like me to have to clean up after myself or to come back around to something that either I got wrong. These aren't really I got wrong. Some omissions. We'll go with that. A month ago when Alex Robinson was on, the topic for the night was top 7 Star Wars names. And we got into kind of the silly names, the Tuckerization of names, some of the different things that George Lucas has done over the years with weird Star Wars names. It was a lot of fun, as I typically do when I finished Alex's top 7 list. I added a couple of things in that I thought, were funny or, my bonus selections. What I am remiss in having mentioned on that episode, and shame on me, is that in the book Poe Dameron Freefall, there are 2 names. And these 2 names are in honor of Alex Segura and I's mutual friends, Rebecca and Andrea, who introduced me to Alex. And I think they're actually watching tonight. I texted Rebecca early. Actually, I texted Rebecca tonight to say, hey, Alex is going to be on the show. You should watch it. And she was FaceTiming with Alex when I texted her. So I'm hoping that Rebecca and Andrea are watching. But in the book, we have a character named, is it Beak or Beck Mons? I don't know if I've ever...
like Becca Mons, basically.
Becca Mons, okay.
Yeah.
Because her name is Rebecca.
I mean, that's how I pronounce it in my head. It's funny because I rarely listen to the audiobook versions of my novels, but the Star Wars audiobooks are so well produced and so cool that I got kind of caught up in my own book. And I think he pronounced the narrator, pronounced it Becca Mons.
Becca Mons. So we have Rebecca, and then we also have the Gilch, which is for Andrea Vigil. And so I didn't include those names in my bonus material when Alex Robinson was on. And I feel horrible about that because not only did they connect me up with you and they're great, it's so fun to go, this is my friend who's canon in Star Wars because of a book her friend wrote. And it was just a cool way to get plugged in. So my first housekeeping item is to shout out Rebecca and Andrea and those great names that are certainly worthy of being on that list.
Oh yeah, they're the best.
The second housekeeping item, and this may be a little more inside baseball for people who listen to Star Wars Minute, and for you, Alex Robinson in particular, one of my favorite things that I always laugh about when it comes up, and I haven't heard it lately, is in the world of Star Wars and the different weapons and the things that we see, when are we going to see the gun that just shoots lightsabers? And I don't remember if this was your thing or if this was Pete's thing.
I don't remember either. It's been a long time.
But it has come up multiple times over the years of, at one point, we're just going to have a gun that just shoots lightsabers.
Right.
Well, if you are excited about The Bad Batch, and if you have watched the Bad Batch trailer that's out, there is a part where I forget what the Bullseye character's name is. It's not Bullseye. Crosshair, that's it. Crosshair, there's a part in the trailer when they're talking about the different things, and he shoots this rifle, and a vibro blade flies out of it. And it's not fully a lightsaber, but like it's a gun that shoots a laser knife of some sort, and it sticks in a robot's head. So we've arrived at almost basically guns that shoot lightsabers. So good job out of you.
It's funny because that takes place during the early days of the Empire, right?
That's right.
There'd be all these extra lightsabers around anyway, so that would be the perfect time to do literally a gun that shot lightsabers.
Yeah, it's a good time to harvest some lightsabers.
Yeah. Well, General Grievous. Ironic. General Grievous did not live to see such. Although his collection then would have been worthless because everyone would have had lightsabers.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you go to that. You go to that arena in Attack of the Clones alone, and there's lightsabers just laying on the ground. Just scoop them up. Yeah. Put them in like a Chewbacca style bandolier, and just load one in. Crank it out there.
Alex,
basically.
Can I ask you a question related to what the thing? And maybe you don't want to answer this on the air, but have you ever accepted money from someone for Tucker from putting them in a Star Wars canon? You know what I mean? That seems
I'm not that business savvy.
It could be a lucrative side gig.
Just doing it for just mentioning my friends. And, yeah,
it's like one of those name a star things where you could be a minor character in the Star Wars. Give it to your wife for Christmas.
You two could be killed in a Star Wars story.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
anyway, I didn't mean to derail the.
No, that's great. Well, now you've got me thinking. So if that's going to be the case, if you could go ahead and send me that menu of what my price levels are before we get to Poe Dameron Freefall Part 2, I want to go ahead and get in early.
Yeah.
Get one of the prime spots.
This is all purely theoretical, of course. He would never accept money.
Never do.
Don't worry, like Disney. That. He's clean as a whistle. Yeah, clean as a whistle.
I like this. Framey in the comment section, it says, sounds like Alex Robinson is asking, how much do I need to pay to be included in the next book?
No. We're not implying any sort of quid pro quo or any of that stuff. We're just a friendly conversation.
Just a couple of friends talking Star Wars.
Just a couple of Alexes talking Star Wars.
Yeah.
That's right. Two Alexes have to make a right. So it doesn't matter. Everything's fine. Well, guys, as we get into kind of the main topic of conversation for tonight, and before we get to our lists, I do want to talk about comic books for a minute. And I told you guys, before we came on the air, I have always respected comic books, but never been a dedicated comic book reader. I have a very small collection of comic books that mostly revolved around when they killed off Superman in the 90s. That was something that my dad and I did that summer, collecting them, adding that to whatever. But I've always been fascinated by comic books, and especially as a Star Wars collector, the vintage Star Wars comic books, of course, intrigue me, and I feel like that's just another thing that I don't have wall space for, to like buy them and frame them and put them up and keep them. But I'm always looking for them, and when I run into them, I'm going to grab them. But you guys both have work and do work in comics, and so what I'd love to do, and we'll start with Alex Segura first. Talk a little bit about, I've heard your Star Wars origin story before, but, kind of your connecting points between Star Wars and growing up with Star Wars, and kind of how that informed your work in comics, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Do you want me to start? Yeah. I mean,
yes, go for it.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, Star Wars, I have yet to meet anyone who doesn't have any kind of connection with Star Wars. I mean, for me, it was, that vision of Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back was, I didn't really understand what was happening, but, seeing that film, or seeing parts of that film, obviously the Ewoks, and then just kind of, people forget now we have this great bounty of Star Wars stories and product, but there was a time, and especially comics, I think, helped fill this void. There was a time when there wasn't a lot of Star Wars happening between the original trilogy and the prequels, and that's kind of when I really became a fan. It was almost like this lost treasure trove of stuff, and yeah, for me, that the original trilogy was my big touchstone, like so many of my age group. But then when the prequels happened, I had a lot of strong memories of just re-engaging with the mythos, and waiting until midnight to see Phantom Menace with a bunch of my friends from college, and experiencing all that again, and even now, as a dad, kind of experiencing it from that perspective, the new trilogy, and now as a writer, which is still surreal to me to think that I could contribute anything to the canon, in at least just even if it's just one story. It's been pretty insane.
It's really cool, and I say I've been really fortunate just doing what I do, which is basically a hobby. I host a TV show in my garage about Star Wars, but I've been so lucky, even over the course of doing this live stream. I think this is episode 16 of doing it this way, of having conversations with people who Star Wars has been a job for them. Like, you got to write a book and get paid to do Star Wars. I've had video game creators, the guy that does the top Star Wars card trader app, like the guy in charge of that, like his work is Star Wars, and that's the dream. Like, everybody gets wants a chance to do that, and you got to do that for sure. But you also work in comics and have worked in comics for a while now, and so there's an interesting crossover to me there too. Was your desire to get involved not only in writing but in comics somehow informed by Star Wars?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there was that and I'll get into it more when we touch on the list, but there were, the comics and the novels were a huge storytelling machine when there weren't any films or, TV or anything kind of mass media. And that was a great resource for me. I remember I read the novelizations, the Alan Dean Foster books, and the movie adaptations, even before I really got to, it was a time before, streaming and everything at our fingertips. You had to kind of make a point of renting the videos or buying the videos, and that wasn't like in my budget. So I did this with we were talking about Death of Superman before we went on the air, and I remember buying the novelization because I didn't have like the funds to like track down every issue. So I remember doing that with the Star Wars, the original trilogy, and then that really pulled me into like the expanded universe and the comic books and things like that. And I've always loved comics as a medium. It was I was drawing Spider-Man comics as a kid, and drawing my own comics and then writing my own comics, and so to make it my career is a dream come true. To like, you kind of want to go back in time and tell your parents, don't take his comics away. This is like his livelihood. Like,
that's right. This is going to turn into something.
That was the one thing I was like obsessed with as a kid. So as parents, you try to get your kids to do the right thing, and maybe you take something away. And, we learn now that those things don't work. They didn't work for me. Like, I just sneak into the garage and get them myself. Yeah.
That's right.
But I think maybe 10 or 12 years. What's that? Yeah.
I was going to say, you bring up a really good point, and I think about this a lot too. As a father, I want to feed my kids' passions. I want to give them the opportunity to do something they love. I have twins that are about to be 13 in 2 weeks, which, Lord help us all. But they, one in particular, has decided recently that she's really into drama and she wants to act and so of course during pandemic everything's shut down, but we have a local community theater that's been doing Zoom acting classes for kids, and so we signed them up for it, and we're doing that. And it tickled me that after the very first one, which this is supposed to be an introductory acting thing, and she's never done acting before, she sent me a text message that said, "Dad, I think I need a more advanced class than this." And I was like, let's give it some time. Let's go ahead and do this one. But also, like I said, so we had a conversation about, why are we here? What are we here to learn? And again, I want to influence, I want to feed the passions my kids have, whether it's art, whether it's drawing, all those kinds of things. And so, like you said, you did that as a kid, and then you were able to translate that into, parts of your career, which is just fantastic.
Yeah. And I mean, I can totally relate to the fatherhood playing a role in it too. I mean, my son is into comics as well, but now I'm reading them with him in a different way. Like when I was a kid, my parents just didn't have the same oversight. I would buy whatever was at the drugstore and read it, and for better or worse. And, now I'm reading like Batman and stuff with my son who's 5. We don't read like the standard stuff. We read like the kid versions, but even that is like, there's some interesting lessons to be pulled from it. So like I launched a Kickstarter last month called The Dusk, and it was basically kind of my version of the street level crime fighter. Maybe somebody that doesn't always just like throw people into jail or punch people up to solve his problems. And the idea was to create something that I could sit and read with my son. He may not want to read it by the time it's done, and that's fine, because but
the intent is still there, and I really like that.
Yeah, the intent is there. Yeah, totally. So.
No, that's for sure. That's awesome. Well, Alex Robinson, same question. You grew up with Star Wars. You've always been a Star Wars fan. Mm-hmm. But kind of how did those origins connect to, the work that you do in comics? Was there kind of a similar, connecting point in line for that?
Well, I am an old man. And when I first saw Star Wars, like home video was not a thing, and you could not so one of the ways you could re-experience Star Wars was in comic book, the comic book adaptation. Mm-hmm. And I had the big treasury size one of that. And home video wasn't even a thing until after Return of the Jedi came out. So I saw the movie so many times in the theater because it was either that or read the comic book or the novelization or whatever. So I remember definitely looking at panels, copying panels from the comic treasury, that shot of Obi-Wan Kenobi being vaporized by the lightsaber. So I guess for me, the early, and as some of my answers will reveal in the upcoming segment, the Star Wars comics were as real as the movies. Like when the comics came out, as far as I was concerned, this was just as legitimate, just as real as anything. Like this is really what happened to these characters. It wasn't now of course we know that every iteration is going to be eventually erased and replaced by another version. So, but when you're a kid, that's the version. So so definitely, and I wasn't even a comics reader other than that until actually I got out of it. By the time I got into comics, I was done with Star Wars.
Okay.
It was a simpler time back then, or a different time back then, when you'd be into something when you were younger, and then you get old enough where you were like, that's kind of baby stuff. Now I'm into comic books, not Star Wars. Now you're expected to be into everything. Once you're into it, you're in it for the rest of your life. And
and I think that's an interesting point, because we live in that age now where, to a lot of degrees, and not always in a bad way, but sometimes in a bad way, especially for old people like me, we have a overabundance of Star Wars media. We have TV shows, movies, comic books, novels, YouTube shorts like the Galaxy of Adventure or whatever it is. There's so much stuff. And in this new era that we live in, if it's in video games, I forgot video games too, but in the era that these things are being produced now, it's all pretty much considered canon. And so there's that in between and that push and pull of do I have to read this to be up on when the next movie comes out? And I've heard people complain about that. I've heard other people go, I'm just a movie watcher, or I'm just, you can choose, it's almost in a way you can pick your own adventure. How deep do you want to go? Do you want to consume literally everything that exists? You have that option. You don't have to be angry about it. You can just choose either I am or I'm not.
And
but we didn't have that.
They'll never make a movie that you can't just go into knowing
I
the
agree.
bare minimum, but they'll never do any. That's why I don't think Ahsoka Tano will ever show up in any movie, because her backstory requires so much explanation from the, but she was in The Mandalorian, but
Well,
anyway.
and that's a really interesting point. And we talked about that on on the Mando recap episode that we did when that episode aired for The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Is I was not an original Clone Wars person. Like, I came to the Clone Wars much later, and honestly, because of Star Wars Rebels and Ahsoka showing up in that, made me want to go back and learn more about that character. And she has become one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And to be an original trilogy person and have grown up with that and gone through the Legends times and all those kinds of things, like, to me, that says something in that character. So when she showed up on Mandalorian, which is very, consumer oriented, like, it's to hit the wider swath. It's not for my level fans. It's a wider level, bring people in. My mother, who knows Star Wars because I love it, has watched all the Mandalorian because Baby Yoda is cute. And so when that episode came out, I was kind of like what you were saying, like, you need to know so much more about her. But my dad called me on the phone. He's like, yeah, I like that one Jedi that had the 2 lightsabers, and he was fine. And he moved right along. Like, they were able to drop it in. But I'm going, you have no idea. Like, there's so much more there. And so that, to me, to come back to my original point, that's juxtapositioned against the time you're talking about, where when the original trilogy movies came out, we didn't have home video until Jedi. In fact, when I was looking some of this up, the first Star Wars comic books came out in April of 1977 before Star Wars dropped in May. So you even had that month ahead. And so for me, the comparison is kind of like the Legends novels in the 90s before we got to the prequels. Like, that was my other Star Wars. Like you were saying with the comic books, that you could go to the theater and see it, or you had the comic books. Like, those were the two ways to connect with Star Wars. It was a much simpler time before the Empire. But now we have this overabundance. And again, I don't think that has to be a bad thing, but it is very interesting in light of what we're seeing. And especially every time a new rumor drops, the Darth Revan thing that was a couple weeks ago where people lost their mind. And I went, I don't know Darth Revan, and that's fine. It doesn't make me not a Star Wars fan.
Not a Star Wars fan.
That's right. I'll turn my card in.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm out. But so for you had that. You had, like you said, you had comics and you had it in a certain compartmentalized area, but connect Star Wars for kind of the career things that you've done, your graphic novels, your illustrations. I mean, is it just kind of like Alex said, you drew, that's what you did because you grew up and you wanted to make your own stories?
Yeah. I mean, I weirdly, it's funny because the only way I think it impacted it is that coming into doing our Star Wars podcast, my meager level of comic book fame was enough to kind of attract attention to the podcast. I'd already been doing a podcast, and but like the fact that it turned into a career is just totally, like someone said, it's like a lottery ticket. You know what I mean? Like, we just happened to come up with an idea that just who wouldn't, getting paid money to just ramble on about Star Wars, like it's 1 minute
at a time.
Yeah, it's absurd. Like, I can't, so it's almost like, there was a certain point where after we did the first trilogy, we were like, okay, are we going to go on and do the prequels, or are we going to do some other totally different podcast? Like, are we going to be known as the Star Wars? If we do the prequels, we're going to be known as the Star Wars guys forever. And we kind of, like Darth Vader, we kind of accepted our fate and said, okay, we're going to do the prequels, and now we are Star Wars guys. And I know way more about Star Wars than I ever would have thought I ever would have. If you would ask me 10 years ago, would you be people having you on as a Star Wars expert, I would have said, what? That's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Because
like you just accepted your fate, though. You've embraced your role.
Well, I mean, it's like lightning striking. You know what I mean? It's like, do you want to be do you want to be Shelley Long going, okay, you know what, I'm walking away from Cheers, like, and not to compare our show in terms of quality, but just in terms of a show that for whatever reason has caught on with a certain number of people. So it's really a fluke, If we had done a Planet of the Apes podcast and that had done, then everyone would have been looking for Planet of the Apes connections all through my work. But So
because I connected with your work on two different levels. I mean, like we were talking before the show, I was gushing about what a fan I was of Alex's work. And then when I started doing the Poe book, I did some research on Star Wars podcasts, and I was like, wait, it's the same guy. Like, it was just like, yeah, it was interesting. It's just, you come into, it's almost like talking about fandom. You come into it in your own way, and you kind of cherry pick the stuff you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat. And, and for somebody in my position, I mean, this is a hobby. This is something that I do. And I've told this story too many times, but when we started our podcast in 2018, and I came home excited from a Christmas party, and I told my wife, I was like, hey, Steve and I are going to start this podcast, and we're going to talk about Star Wars. And she looked at me with one of those, like, what are you talking about faces? And she said, who do you think is going to listen to that? And my exact answer was, and I mean this to this day, I'm thankful for everybody in the live chat. I'm thankful for the folks that download the audio version. But if nobody listened, I'd still want to do it, because I get a chance to hang out and talk to you guys and talk to people that I admire or do things that I think is cool about this thing that I love. And I've literally loved my entire life. And so it is, it's its own kind of community. It is my cheers. It is my Star Wars cheers to get to, sit at a bar, have a drink, and nerd out about something that people in my house don't understand, but it's fun for me. And I can get into some of those things with people like you and go, hey, this is fun. And then for me, the fascinating part is then to also hear it connect to, your work as an artist, your work as an author, the way the intersecting lines of it, and just go, holy cow, that's so neat. And the experiences that we get to, I get to share it vicariously through sort of knowing you guys, internet friend. My wife calls it my space friends from the internet. Are you doing your show tonight? Are you talking to your space friends from the internet? Yes, dear, I am. And I'm excited about it. So as we talk about comic books and we talk about Star Wars comics, and that's our topic for the night, we're doing top 7 Star Wars comic book moments. We use the term moments really broadly. We're going to do what we normally do. I'm going to put some stuff up on the screen. I found some images, and I meant to send these to you guys ahead of time just to make sure I found an image that actually corresponded to the thing that you sent me. So I hope we got it. If we didn't, we'll see. That's the way it goes.
Star Wars comic book roulette.
Whatever the Force wills.
That's right. Whatever the Force brings us. But we're going to start out, and we're going to go with Alex Segura first. Dun, dun. And we're going to get to your list.
We did not corroborate our lists, and I was curious if we came up with any duplicates, but I'd be surprised.
And here's what's fun. And I think I told you this when we emailed initially about this, is I said, if there's some overlap, we'll do those. And then we'll pull out the ones that you guys that had that were different. In the 14 moments that were sent to me, to the best of my knowledge, there's not really any overlap. So this is going to be even more fun. And so, like I said, I did a little bit of research.
Identical.
That's right. No two Alexes are alike. You're like snowflakes. But I did do a little wait, not the modern version of a snowflake. That's a whole different thing. But I did do a little bit of research about Star Wars comics as we were getting ready to do this week, because that's my default position, especially if I don't know about it automatically, is I need to go look that up. And so, like I said earlier, kind of the original run of Star Wars comics, there were 107 issues. The first issues came out in April of 1977, a month before Star Wars came out. The first 6 issues were basically the adaptation of A New Hope. It was the comic book versions of that. And then from there, and I found this interesting because these are the kind of things that I feel like we hear more about today. Like in a good example might be like Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin. At some point the show passed him writing the novels and trying to catch up. And so when the comic books happened, Star Wars, they didn't know what was going to happen with Star Wars to start with. That famous story of like, is this even going to be good? Are people going to go see it? And then it blew up. And so the sequels started happening from there. And so basically the initial writers, Ray Thomas, Howard Chaykin, they were kind of told, like, you have a couple of choices. You can wait on George to figure out what the story is going to be and then do something like that. And they opted to go in the other direction, which was to kind of do small one-off little arcs, little stories that they didn't necessarily have to connect to him in order to get approval for, which I think is really great. Even if they didn't know for sure that's what they were doing at the time, it created what we see now, which is fleshing out stories and adding to the lore and adding to the canon of like, okay, there's what you see in the movies, but then there are all these other adventures, Han Solo and Chewie, that bounty hunter. It started in episode or issue 8 where we get Jackson and, all these other fun things that became a part of this. And they did some of the same George Lucas kinds of things. They adapted Seven Samurai for, those first like 7, 8, 9, 10, issues. Let's take something that's kind of familiar and is the backbone of Star Wars and do comic versions of it. So that was really neat to me to kind of go and look some of that up. And especially I'm still fascinated just by the fact that the comics came out a month before the movie. Like, we couldn't get the toys on time, but we got the comics early. So
yeah,
just
it was
a
a
little
different
bit
mentality when it came to like exclusivity or spoilers. It was just everything wasn't readily available. So
That's
if you
right.
read it in the comic book first, it was still okay because you couldn't post about it on the internet.
That's exactly right. That's how all those Legends novels survived for so long.
Yeah.
So Alex Segura, top 7 Star Wars comic moments, right up top, number 7, Poe Dameron by Charles Soule and Phil Noto.
I'm
Tell us
extremely
about this.
biased by the. Yeah, I mean, I love this series as a reader, as a fan, and then I had to obviously revisit it when doing research for the Poe novel. But I think Charles really has a great handle on Poe and Phil's art. Phil's a friend of mine. He drew an image for my wedding of all the groomsmen as like an X-Men like team.
Nice.
He's just a fantastic artist, and it's hugely underrated still. But he ended up doing the cover for Freefall, which was a fun twist. But yeah, it's basically what Freefall is building to. So if you like Freefall, you will love Charles Soule's Poe Dameron run.
Absolutely. And Charles Soule has continued to be, a key fixture in these newer Star Wars comic books. He's doing the High Republic stuff. And, for not being an expert and not reading any of them and knowing about it, and of course, I see his name. I see it on Twitter when news drops and new books and that kind of stuff. So anytime I see his name, I feel like I pay a little more attention because I'm like, he's got cred as a Star Wars comic book guy.
Yeah, he was very kind. I mean, I've known him. We worked together at DC when he was just breaking into Big Two comics, and I was there doing publicity. But he's just a really nice guy, and he was nice enough to read Freefall and say a few kind words. And it was like being blessed by Poe's comic book godfather, I guess.
Right. No, that's really cool. Well, all right. So we jump into number 6, Star Wars by Aaron Cassidy and Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I like this arc mainly because it was Marvel's first series when they reacquired the license, or when Disney bought Lucasfilm and the rights kind of transferred to Marvel, but it just feels like a lost film, like something that that was part of the original trilogy and has that same epic scope and feel. You can John Cassidy doesn't do a lot of interiors these days, but his art is so hyper detailed and he's a great storyteller. And, it just gave me that feeling of watching the original trilogy. And so I have a lot of fondness for this arc.
Yeah, this is a great one. And as we've talked about before, not being a comic book guy per se, I do have a very small amount of Star Wars comics. In fact, they're sitting next to me. I have 3 of them. I have this one somewhere, and I don't know where it is because it's not where the rest of the stuff is supposed to be.
I feel validated now.
Well, I mean, if a guy who's not a comic book guy has it, like, you're clearly doing something right.
Yes.
But you're exactly right. And the thing that even just looking at this cover that stands out to me is it feels like original trilogy. Not that there's anything wrong with prequels and sequels and any of that. I love those too. But it speaks to my original trilogy soul. You've got, these hero poses. Of course, you've got the yellow jacket Bespin or, award ceremony Luke, which is always one of my favorite Luke Skywalker outfits. Mm-hmm. And then, but it also has like, I don't have the right artistic terms to describe these things, but like the original posters and almost the borderline, like sexy heroine Leia with a little bit of leg showing. You've got the outline of the Darth Vader helmet and the stars in the background. Like, it really speaks to me on a certain level, like, a new version of those classic Star Wars art pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to like the editorial mandate, but it seems to me as a reader, the Dark Horse stuff was great, and it went, and it went really into the weeds and expanded on times and periods and spaces of the canon that we weren't really familiar with from the films. But I think once Marvel stepped in, they really wanted to, or it seemed like they wanted to just go big and go familiar and really kind of hit the high notes. And which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there was a hunger for that, and so this first arc really felt that way to me.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's in this one. Is this the one? And this is going to sound like a weird question, but there's one of the ones that I've read. Maybe it's actually the Shattered Empire one, where you have the shot where Leia's being like hidden on Kashyyyk, I think, with Chewbacca, and you get Leia in her underpants, like when something happens and she springs into action, and like it was this weird in between, like PG-13, like, oh, these were the comic books that were like in between ages of, you know, a little more grown up, a little more whatever, but she was being attacked while she was in bed.
I don't think that was Shattered Empire.
I have to remember, I didn't make that up. I'm not just in this like weird Princess Leia underpants mode, but
it's okay.
but it's in one of them. And I remember as I was reading it the first time, not being super familiar with Star Wars comic books, going, oh, I wasn't prepared for, you know, this, you know, a little bit more grown up, a little bit more. And again, that's something that Star Wars has always done too, is take, you know, different versions of things. And, you know, as the animated series have progressed, they get a little bit darker. They grow up a little bit more. I wasn't originally excited for Bad Batch because I was never originally initially a Clone Wars person. But like, as the storytelling developed and as the show has progressed over the years, like, it feels more like a, you know, grown up show, but it's animated and kids are still going to connect to it too. And so it's an interesting, I guess, juxtaposition of, you know, art and, you know, on a practical level, like if you're asleep and somebody attacks you, you might be in your underpants. So Princess Leia still has to go to the bathroom, still has to eat, still has to do these normal life living things. It's not all, you know, into the garbage smasher flyboy.
Exactly.
So, and I mentioned this just a second ago, but your next selection, number 5, is Shattered Empire, Rucka Chiqueto, Unzueta.
Yeah, I think it's Chicheta, yeah.
Okay. Well, of the other 3 that I have,
nice.
this is one of the ones that I had as well. So I felt validated reading your list and being like, hey, look, I have some of these things.
Yeah, this one's a lot of fun. I mean, it's I guess I'm showing my cards and leaning very heavily into the current canon, but I think Greg Rucka is one of my favorite writers and a huge like influence on my own writing, from comics to crime writing. So, you know, having him, you know, he's so versatile, and he's got a great handle on Poe's parents, who are big characters in this series, and he also really shows his skill at writing the core, you know, original trilogy characters like Luke and Leia and Han and Chewie, and it's just a fun. It doesn't have the epic scope of the Aaron Cassidy stuff, but that's almost what makes it more valuable. It's very character driven and kind of fills in the gaps, and creates some connective tissue between the original trilogy and the new trilogy, which is fun.
Absolutely, and I think too, and even just looking through it, I was flipping through these today when I found them. You know, the art styles being so different. I love this cover because again, it has a very vintage feel to it a little bit. But when you get to some of the, you know, some of these interior art pieces, and like, it kind of looks like the Power of the Force 2 figures. Like you've got like the big angular jaw, you know, Luke, he looks a little bit like He-Man, you know, and that's what's fun about comics too, is you get the opportunity to stretch, you know, design styles and, you know, different versions. You know, I'm such a sucker for like Ralph McQuarrie art. So when I see those little nods show up in anybody's art, like I key into that. So it's fun to see a variety of different styles in comic books.
Totally.
So, okay. So we've got that as number 5. Number 4, Dark Empire, Veach and Kennedy.
Yeah. I mean, now it's not. I think continuity was a whole different animal back when this came out, and this was also from that period that I was referencing before. You know, when people weren't really sure there was going to be, you know, another Star Wars film. You know, we had the original trilogy, and there was that long gap. And I mean, Dark Empire just sets the stage. It's like, what if Luke went to the dark side, and that's a great what if story, even if it's canon or not. It's a, you know, Cam Kennedy is this fantastic British artist, did stuff, you know, 2000 AD, Judge Dredd, did some really great Batman stuff. And Tom Veach also did a lot of Vertigo stuff. I read his Animal Man run with Steve Dillon not too long ago, or reread it. It's just a great kind of off the wall Star Wars tale. It feels, like I said, the ones that really grab me are the ones that feel really epic, like they could be films on their own, because when I was writing the Poe book, I wanted it to have that same cinematic quality where you're reading it and you're feeling like, okay, this is important. It's not, you're not just filling gaps between beats, but you're actually creating something that counts. And you definitely get that feeling from Dark Empire. And it asks a lot of questions and puts characters in unexpected positions, but it feels very well researched. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books.
No, that's awesome. And I'll say one of the things that getting these lists from both of you guys has done for me is it has given me a checklist of things that I am now going to need to get and find and read and bring myself up to speed on. So that's very helpful.
I'm excited that we didn't have any overlap, So I'm curious. Now I'm going to be a curious viewer of Thomas Robinson's list.
That's right. Well, we've got a couple more of yours. And so we jump into number 3, Star Wars Adventures with Michael Morrissey.
Yeah, I mean, Mike's a friend of mine, and I didn't. That's not why I put him on here. I just think he has a great way with these characters, and the Star Wars Adventures stuff, which is through IDW in partnership with Marvel. These are all ages versions of the characters, which doesn't mean that the stories are watered down in any way. It just means that they're maybe not as violent or as they're geared towards younger readers. But Mike has a real handle on these characters and can kind of boil them down in a way that's really hard. It's hard to do all ages content with, not to get too corporate sounding, with IP that has kind of run the gauntlet, like something like Batman. He's been shown in so many different ways, like very, extreme versions, like, the Snyder Cut or Zack Snyder's version, or, Christopher Nolan. So when someone does a really timeless take that's all ages, like Batman the Animated Series or that kind of thing, it takes a lot of skill, and you have to really boil it down to the core of these characters, and he does it really well. So
that's really awesome. And like I said, the excitement I have not only to find all these things that you guys have put on these lists and to read them for myself and, become more familiar, but also I see so many names as I'm going through this that, names that I recognize. And part of that's being part of the Star Wars podcast community, whether it's, I know Mike Morrissey and Charles Soule have been on the Around the Galaxy podcast with my friend Pete. And, I see these different names and I go, oh, I know who that is. I need to, research their work more. But it feels comforting even in its own way, even if I'm not fully informed on, the products that they've put out so far. So number 2, we have Knights of the Old Republic, which is also, a favorite for a lot of different reasons. And this is John Jackson Miller, which is another familiar name with, the writing that he's done. So tell us about this one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I loved about the Dark Horse era of Star Wars comics is that it expanded on, certain timelines that weren't, or, eras of the franchise that weren't even really touched on in the movies. And, John has written a lot of stuff. He wrote Iron Man for Marvel. He's done a lot of Star Trek novels of late, and he's written a lot of great Star Wars novels. Particularly, I liked his Obi-Wan Kenobi novel, which is more relevant now with the show coming. But, yeah, John is clearly a fan. But he does it in such a way that, he's got such craft to how he does it that it never feels like fan service. Sometimes you can read something and you think, oh, this person's just doing it because they want to see this, and it's not necessarily serving the story. But you can tell there's a passion there, and it's, it explores this era that, maybe not a lot of people are familiar with. But it's also fun when you're in a different kind of chunk of time. Things happen to characters, and you have a lot more freedom as a creator. You can do things that you can't really do with established characters that are very set in what they do or what their fates are.
Absolutely. And I think that's
anything he does is great.
Michael, for sure. But yeah, I think that's a really great point, talking about the time period. And that's what we're seeing right now with all of this High Republic stuff that we're getting. And I'll be the first to admit I'm woefully behind. I haven't read the books. I haven't read the comics. I need to catch up because I've heard they're really good. And everybody I've talked to has said, what is your deal? Why don't you just do it? Because I'm a slacker. I'm lazy. I'm overcommitted a lot of times with my time. There's a lot of reasons and excuses I could make.
Well, you're picking what parts to engage with, which is kind of what we're saying. Right. You can't absorb it all.
You can't absorb it all. And I do want to consume these things. And so I have to figure out ways to make that work. But your original point is a great one, which is it's really an unexplored time period. And now that it's a canon part of, the Disney lore and the Star Wars lore now, they get to, really dig into it and figure out, we're going to get some of the movies that connect to that. I think The Acolyte is the one that may come kind of at the end of this High Republic, era that they're working on right now. but it's neat to see, what can they do with it. And when I see people tweeting about it or talking about it, they're like, oh, I really like, this person. I'm like, that's a character. Of course, I've been more than enthralled by the idea of Geode, a sentient rock something character. That's fun. And that's that weird part of Star Wars we all love. But to be able to work in a different time frame opens it up so much more. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, totally.
All right. And so for your number one, as we get in here, we have Star Wars Hope Dies by Gillen and LaRocca. And I'm very interested to hear about this because I know nothing about it, but just looking at the cover art, I hope it's, kind of what I think it is. But tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, this fills the gap between New Hope and Empire Strikes Back in terms of, you have this great victory at the end of New Hope, like pulled from the jaws of defeat, and then we fast forward a little bit, and at the beginning of Empire, the rebellion is really at its lowest point. And how did it get there? And this and that's what I meant when I said earlier that Marvel, when they kind of took over the comic book publishing, they decided to go big. And also they had the benefit of a clean slate in terms of continuity, whereas, Dark Horse is weaving everything between, years and years of novels and video games and other things. And when they kind of shunted all that into Legends and said, we're starting clean and all that exists are the movies, that opened up a lot of possibilities for the Marvel stuff and the novels. I definitely, Poe benefited from that too. But yeah, Hope Dies fills that gap, and it does it. Kieran Gillen is a fantastic Star Wars writer, Dr. Aphra, and just to name a few, Darth Vader. He did a nice run on Vader. And Sal LaRocca is a comic book veteran. He's done everything from X-Men to Doctor Doom to the Fantastic Four. And he's done a bunch of Star Wars comics. This being my favorite, but he's an all pro. So it's a great place to hop into if you just want a good starting point for Star Wars comics. And I guess my stuff leans very heavily into the new canon. So I think I know where Alex's list is going to be.
That's okay, and that's what I like about this. And I'll even throw that in as a kind of a caveat as we transition into Alex Robinson's list. When I kind of threw this idea out there to you guys in an email, Alex Robinson's response was, I would love to come back on, but I'm going to be the first to tell you I'm not current on all of the comic books. And I said, that's not a deal breaker because neither am I. The whole point is I was current on a lot of these is, research. And that kind of turned me on to a lot of stories that I hadn't just caught up with. But it's cool to see. That's right. And I love that. And I love the different perspectives. And that's what I think, adds to a conversation. And so we're going to jump in, Alex Robinson, with your top 7 list. I know Alex Segura is excited because he just wants to see what you're going to say. And, both of you feel, of course,
a crossfire section where we start.
I was going to say, honestly, you should feel Alex Robinson was too quiet during your time. So feel free to chime in with thoughts as we work our way through his list as well.
I just assumed he was like quietly seething.
No, I had only read one of those, so I didn't want to like trample in with just like, boy, that sounds cool. Or, like I didn't have anything meaningful to contribute on anything. So
no. It's all meaningful. We're hanging out talking Star Wars. It's fine. So for you, Alex Robinson, number 7, we have the Dragon Lord saga, Marvel's number 11 through 15, 1978.
Yeah,
this was
the first. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I was reading the Star Wars comics, and this is the first kind of storyline I read in the beyond the movies. So I just loved it because it was like, a water planet with people riding dragons, as you can see, and things like that. So it was very much like not anything we'd seen before in Star Wars. So that was really exciting. And I remember when I was a kid, I actually sat down with a tape recorder and read the entire story, doing different voices for the characters and all that kind of stuff. So I really got into it. So to me, it was just as real as any of the movies. So.
Well, when I looked this up, because when you sent me your list and this was the very first thing at the top of it, I was like, I have no idea what that is. And so, of course, I had to go and Google it. But what it immediately reminded me of, and I'm sure there's an overlap or connection there somewhere, is the Boba Fett animated part of the holiday special where Boba's riding that, big dinosaur. It wasn't the mythosaur, but he was riding whatever that was in the water, and they go to the planet. And, the Y-Wing that Luke was in with R2 and 3PO crashes in the water. Like, that's what it felt like, as I was like, oh, somebody riding a dinosaur in the water. Like it felt, very connected to those two things.
Yeah, I think kind of like you said, at this point they were just kind of taking a lot of sci-fi and movie tropes and just kind of throwing everything together. The other main character in the story is clearly it's like a mutiny in it's like a master and commander type story. You know what I mean? There's a just despotic sea captain and everything. So it really was just Archie Goodwin, the writer, taking these different science fiction tropes and just playing around with them. So
absolutely. Well, that's a fantastic entry into your list, and we're going to move right along to your number 6, which is the Biggs deleted scenes in Marvel #1.
Yes. So as everyone knows, Biggs was mostly cut out of the original version, but of the original cut of Star Wars. Originally, Lucas had planned to cut back and forward between Luke watching the Star Destroyer battle with his binoculars but
Whole wormy.
Yeah, so again, to me, this scene seemed magical. The fact that it was cut out of the movie, and yet here was like an additional part of the movie that we knew nothing about and explained who Biggs was and stuff. So, in a sense, I guess it was the first real like expanded universe type stuff because you were seeing them in scenes that didn't make the cut of the movie. And of course, when you see the actual scene, anyone can find it on YouTube. It's the movie is definitely improved by not having it where it is. I mean, it's kind of interesting, but cutting back from the Star Destroyer battle would just be kind of clunks it up. But it was really fun to see.
And it's so fun too. Like when you look at this panel that we've got on the screen and you compare that to those deleted scenes, you've got Luke wearing the bucket hat. You've got Biggs with that awesome mustache that's very 70s. Like, the cape, the whole deal. Like, it rings very true and connected to it, which, like we said up top, I think it was the first 6 issues of the comic books were the adaptation of Star Wars. So it makes sense that would end up there. But in a book, you can leave it. In the movie, they're like, yeah, that part's got to go. Yeah, right. Yep. And Michael says that stash was just too cool for the movie.
Biggs is kind of like the proto Lando. He's like mustachioed, caped guy. It's
they were trying it out before they decided on it.
Yeah, ring theory. Yeah,
that's right. It all rhymes. So number 5, Thank the Maker, Star Wars Tales. I don't know anything about this, so please inform us.
This was an interesting story because it came out. I'm not sure what year, but it was definitely obvious. It was after the prequels. And so this was one of the first times that I think they really did a great job of kind of connecting stuff that happened in the prequels with stuff that happened in the original trilogy. Like, for instance, none of us knew that Anakin Skywalker had built C-3PO, which, the fact that they don't really interact very much except for they're on the clouds when they're on Cloud City. And so this was really a good, it's, a very sweet tale of sort of Darth Vader looking back on his lost humanity and so on. So, which for the time was very, this was when the prequels are not getting a lot of love. So, so the fact that they were kind of, and I love it when they're able to stitch together continuity from the two eras. So, yeah, and I think I think this artist wound up doing a lot of Star Wars stories, and anyway, you should check it out. Well, and there's no reason it can't be canonical still. So I think
that's right.
Still can. Yeah.
It's totally fair. Everything's in bounds.
Yes.
And being 100% unfamiliar with anything that's in this, so just like this has, of course, a very Hamlet feel to it. Like we've got Vader holding, and I'm sure that's intentional. And I don't know if that is informed by the story or if it was just hey, let's do the cover this way. But I like that, and it draws my attention to something like that.
Yeah, it's a really good story. I encourage people to. I'm sure you can find it on the internet somewhere, but
no doubt,
to track it down.
No doubt. Well, we're going to go to number 4. We have Star Wars Infinities.
Now this is kind of like basically this is Star Wars What If. They did one for each of the original 3 movies, and basically this is what if Luke failed in blowing up the Death Star. So it's kind of like what would have happened after that, So and then it basically, and then they did one for Empire, which I don't remember what the mystery thing was there, but what the differing point was, but they basically each wound up following out what would have happened for the rest of the trilogy in each of these alternate realities. Like I think in the Return of the Jedi one ends with him wearing, one of them ends with Darth Vader wearing white armor, having turned basically good. And they're fun kind of what if stories. I know Disney Plus is doing a what if TV show apparently,
Yes.
but I would love it if they started doing something like that with Star Wars, because I think there's just so much potential for those kind of pivotal moments where you can kind of but I don't know how they would do it in a movie or TV show, because you'd have to have, I guess they could do it animated, because otherwise it'd be too hard to do CGI actors for everybody.
That's right. Well, and I think that's exactly right. With the Marvel stuff they're doing, it's going to be animated, versions of what if Peggy was Captain America? What if, the different versions of that, which I think is a great, I hate to sound like I'm smarter than I am, because I'm not, a thought exercise on like, what if it was different? We've all done that. We've all imagined, what if Darth Vader ended up being good? When you were talking about that, I remember reading one time about the storyline with Vader in the white armor, and of course that intrigues me, because you have, first of all, you have the prototype Boba that we're all familiar with the white,
right?
But I also remember, and I haven't gone back to see if I can find it again, because I think it's on Amazon, but I remember growing up as a kid, the things that I watched were the A-Team, Magnum PI, Knight Rider, all those classic 80s whatever shows. There was an episode of Knight Rider where Kit got painted white, and basically because he lost all of his powers and abilities, and it was like this weird, like kind of going the other way. He became he could talk, but that was it. And I could feel like I've exploded that in my mind, but as you're talking about a white armored Vader, I'm thinking about Kit being painted white. So, and I like that Alex. I don't remember, and that's why I need to find this, because it's one of those things like when you're a kid and like my grandparents' house was the biggest house I'd ever seen, and then as a grown-up when I saw it, I was like, that house isn't really that big. Like I could have exploded this whole thing in my mind and blown it out of proportion, but I haven't gone and found it yet to make sure.
Wow.
For me, it's that episode of Transformers where I think it was after the movie where Optimus comes back as like a zombie. It terrified me as a kid, and I mentioned it to people, and they're just like, "What?" I mean, I know I realize this is a Star Wars podcast.
No, that's fine.
We should go in the weeds on Transformers.
That's all right. Yeah. But and so the other thing that I have, or the thought that I have, because Alex Segura talked about Dark Empire, and so does Infinities run in a similar vein of like, what if Luke had turned bad? What is it the same kind of thing, or is it a little bit different?
I think the Empire Strikes Back one might be Leia becoming Vader's apprentice.
Okay.
Like when they leave Cloud City, Leia leaves Cloud City as Vader's prisoner. And so like, I think eventually he starts nurturing her force powers. I'm sure, I don't remember if there's one specifically where Luke is actually tempted by the dark side, but I can't speak to that.
Absolutely. Well, that's cool. And like I said, it's me not knowing enough about these things, so I clearly have a lot of homework to do.
Yeah. I mean, I probably haven't read it in 10 years, so
I got you. Well,
it's very well could be my white kid. I could totally be making this all up, and I'm like, I had no idea that comic was actually about that.
Same thing. Well, as we move from number 4, we move into number 3, and we have Darth Vader fighting Jocasta Nu.
So there's some new canon for you. I'm really a fan of the Darth Vader series. All 3 variations that they've done. Well, there you go. Getting in.
There we go. Some confirmation from Michael. White Kid is definitely real, and it involved radioactive waste. So I feel moderately validated. Thank you, Michael.
It's like the Joker. He fell into there and he came out and he was all.
That was it.
So yeah, Darth Vader series. I recommend all 3. One takes place. They kind of take place immediately. One of the movies ends. One of them does when Star Wars ends. One of them is right after Empire ends, and one of them is after Revenge of the Sith, the end of Revenge of the Sith. So this is the one with Revenge of the Sith, because Darth Vader is told by the Emperor to track down Jocasta Nu, who has a list of all like the new younglings that were about to come into the Jedi Academy, and obviously he wants to put a stop to that. So it's just fun seeing. Again, a character like Jocasta Nu, who, if in case you don't know, she's the librarian from Attack of the Clones, who chastises Obi-Wan in the library. So it's fun seeing her
not knowing where the planet is.
Yeah,
no, exactly. that was Yoda. I'm sorry.
Yeah. She's the one who says if it's not in the Jedi archives, then it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Well,
and looking at and looking at this cover, and I know it's kind of
Mhm.
small to see on the screen, but I think this is also a Charles Soule book as well. So again, we have that connecting point with these newer books.
Yeah, so I always enjoy reading those Darth Vader, and I love the relationship between the sort of almost like sadomasochistic relationship between Vader and Palpatine. Like Palpatine is always treating him like total garbage, and Vader's just like, "Yes, sir.
Okay, it's fine.
I guess." Every now and then he gets all pouty, being Anakin, and he throws a little temper tantrum, and the Emperor has to zap him again or blow up his armor or do something that humiliates him, and it's fantastic.
Just to remind him who's boss,
Exactly, yeah.
All right. Well, okay. That's right. So number 3, we move into number 2, Darth Vader meets Sabe, 2020. This is a very recent one.
Yes, this is very recent. Takes place. I don't remember when this one takes place. It might be after Empire. Basically, Vader winds up meeting one of Padme's old handmaidens. And he's all like besmitten with her because, of course, she looks just like what Padme would look like if she was still alive at that point. And this era of Darth Vader is very much like I'm pining for. I'm doing anything. He's trying to use force tricks to bring her back to life, and it's really sad and pathetic. But I really love the storyline they did. It definitely threw a lot of curveballs that I did not see coming. So
well, and that's a great one. And there were several different panels when I was working on, pulling some stuff together for the slideshow. And it was almost those moments where I had to look at it myself and go, is that Padme? No, it's Sabe. That's the whole point, is they were decoys and all of that. So,
and again, tying together the modern era with the prequel era, I always enjoy that.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us that is your sweet spot. Well, that brings us to your number 1. We have Lando and we have Lobot's origin, and I'm a sucker for anything Lando. So
more Charles Soule goodness in this one. He does a great job of writing Lando, and throughout the story, he's having Lobot is kind of like his sidekick, who they have witty conversations and banter with each other, and I'm like, wait a minute, has Lobot just been? Did they just not want to pay John Hollis to speak in the movies, or what's the deal? And they address that. I don't want to spoil it, but I thought it was really clever and really changes the way you look at Lobot after it. You're like, oh wow, look at that guy. So
this may be where I start with all of my homework, is with this, because that is the literal thought I had as I was searching out. Of course, this is a whole run of books, and so this covers Lando number 1. And there's several. And so I got, the synopsis of the plot line, which is Lando goes and steals a pleasure yacht, and it turns out it's Palpatine's pleasure yacht. And it's all this, stuff. But that was in the panels that I pulled up in the Google image search. There's all these, it's dialogue between Lando and Lobot. And the exact thought I had was, wait, Lobot doesn't talk. He gets communicated with on Lando's little wristwatch, his Casio watch calculator. It was, so I can't wait to find out more about exactly that.
Yeah, it's a good series.
Well, that is, guys, y'all have had 2 amazing lists, and before we get to kind of my little leftovers, which I tend to do sometimes, or add in, do y'all have any kind of cross thoughts? Now we're in our crossfire part of the show. Alex Segura, Alex Robinson. Is there anything that stood out between y'all's 2 lists that y'all want to bring up or talk about?
They were good. I agree with Alex's list and my own.
well, if you don't agree with your own, we have a problem. So
I agree with Alex's list. I disagree with my own. Where do I get off? I will say that the Star Wars, Marvel's new Star Wars number 1. I don't know if it's what's the deal with spoilers? Are we allowed to? Should we just not say things that happen? Or
go for it.
I say go for it.
I did not. I enjoyed those comics general. I disagree with ever having Darth Vader confront Luke before the events of Empire. I want that to be their first meeting. I don't like them having a history at that point. So
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because it just kind of changes the significance of it. But within that context, I thought it was again. So that's kind of, at some point he fights Darth Vader in a lightsaber duel. before the
Yeah.
events of Empire, and I disagree with it. So,
And I thought it was interesting, and I didn't realize that. But one of the things that I did found doing some of my research, getting ready for this, was that Darth Vader learns Luke's name from Boba Fett in one of the comic book runs or comic book issues, where he, there's a panel where it's Slave One flying towards the Star Destroyer, and he's in there, and he's like, "What have you found?" And he basically says, "Not much, but a name," or what. And so he learns Luke Skywalker's name from Boba Fett, which is, whether that part is still canon or not, I'm not sure, but it is another interesting, connecting point. So
I did regret not having Infinities on my list, because that was one I really liked. That first one, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I always end up. That's great. Well, when I do this, I always end up, kind of picking a couple things, that weren't on the guests list, but I wanted to add to the conversation. And not being really familiar and conversant in comic books, I kind of went with like the extreme and weirdness. So these are my other. That's right. My other Star Wars comics moments. The first one is Age of Republic #1. We have Jar Jar with a lightsaber. You have that weird random floating dark Jedi, dark Jar Jar theory. Was he the one that masterminded this whole thing? I'm not buying into all that, but I like the idea of Jar Jar with a lightsaber, especially when we see him in Attack of the Clones and he's the or in Phantom Menace when he's the bumbling general and falling down, and now he has a lightsaber. So why not?
I really regret the fact that George Lucas backed down about Jar Jar. I think I wish all three of the movies had been filmed back to back, so he could have done them without any audience like expectations or anything like that. So because who knows, I think Jar Jar could have had an interesting arc if he had been allowed to. And not saying I agree with the Dark Jedi thing, but whatever he had in mind for him, I think it could have had more potential than it did. So I can't believe I'm going to be there. That's going to be the caption of this episode: is the guy who demands more Jar Jar and regrets that he was not.
Breaking news.
Alex was conspicuously silent.
Breaking Star Wars Day news. I'm going to cut this clip together. Alex Robinson demands more Jar Jar. Well, and so in looking up some of this other kind of stuff, there's a panel too where, and I don't know what directly it relates to, but there was a character, George R. Binks. And so it has like that weird Star Wars naming thing. And, is it somebody connected to Jar? Like it was weird. I couldn't get into it because my head wasn't prepared for that. So we have that. The next one that I picked was Tag and Bink. And, Tag and Bink is like, the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of Star Wars, or as somebody else put it, the Lion King 1.5, that weird in between Lion King sequel where it's just from their perspective and they're these bungalow. Yeah, we did that and we tripped over and knocked the thing over. And and of course I love the lore that they were almost in the Solo movie and then they ended up being cut or edited out. But this also, from my era and age of Star Wars when I was in college, the YouTube Troops video, the fan film about the stormtroopers that are basically like cops but on Tatooine driving her, like that's what this always reminds me of, as just being that kind of weird, quirky, like we don't have to take it all quite so seriously.
Kevin Rubio wrote both of those, right? Didn't he write
I think that's right.
Troops and the Tag and Bink?
That sounds correct. And Michael says, did Lord and Miller actually get to shoot that scene? I don't know the answer to that question, but it would have certainly been in their half of that movie and not in the Ron Howard half of that.
I can easily see it just being like a kind of like almost like background Easter egg kind of thing where if you know who it is, then you're like, oh, look, there's Tag and Bink and they're doing something that,
And I even heard somebody... the Jason Sudeikis scout trooper that punches Baby Yoda, there was somebody that were kicking around the idea of what if those two troopers were the Tag and Bink in Mandalorian. It could fit in that too.
I wouldn't count them out just yet.
That's right. There's still time. So then this is, of course, hits me in a sweet spot. The Star Wars Indiana Jones crossover. And this is a thing that really happened. And I didn't believe it the first time I saw it. And I went and found some of the panels.
Well, define really happened.
It somebody really wrote and put this out on paper.
Yeah.
It was printed.
But we have this comic book thing where Indy and Short Round, and that may be my favorite part of it, is Indy and Short Round are together on further adventures after Temple of Doom. And they discover this crashed thing. And of course, the first panels are kind of like close-up shots. They find this thing in the woods. And as the story progresses, there's somebody shot by an arrow and it pulls away. And it's the Millennium Falcon crashed into a tree. And Chewbacca is basically like Sasquatch or Bigfoot, like up in a tree watching from a distance. And it says something about, should we go after the great beast? And he was like, no, we should leave him rest. But Indy says, this all feels weirdly familiar. Super meta, super, just weird and strange. But why not? It was a long time ago. Now, it wasn't a galaxy far, far away, but archaeology, you could, if you stretch just a little bit, you could try and make a connection just for fun.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard the Carbonite Dream theory?
I have not heard the Carbonite Dream theory.
The Carbonite Dream theory is that when Han Solo was in Carbonite, he dreamt the Indiana Jones movies, which is why certain characters and things reappear in Indiana Jones that are basically from
gotcha.
from Han Solo's dream.
Subconscious. There you go. So like
when he meets Hitler,
3PO and R2.
Ozzel, 3PO and R2,
That's right.
Club Obi-Wan, all sorts of different things. So
I like that. Well, and it does remind me of a picture I have saved on my phone of a tattoo that I saw one time that was brilliant, which was Indy in like a cave somewhere holding up a torch, and the thing he found was Han Solo frozen in carbonite. And I just went, I like this. Like, it works for me.
Yeah.
And of course, the other story that connects to that for me is I have twin girls, and several years ago, one of them was obsessed with Han Solo and Star Wars. The other one was obsessed with Indiana Jones. And their light bulb moment when they realized that was the same guy was one of the, I was like, with kids,
and
like,
twins.
And like, how did, that was their deal. So of course, for the longest time, our running joke was that we were going to have a Harrison Ford birthday party for them and invite everybody to come as their favorite Harrison Ford. You could get like earring Harrison Ford, you could get like witness Harrison Ford, you could get a little bit of all of it.
I'm going fugitive Harrison Ford.
That's right.
Harrison Ford.
I like Air Force One just because of David Letterman always calling him the ass-kicking president. So, whatever it is that works. So when Indy and Star Wars meet, it works for me as a, kid from that era. And then the last one that I have is Star Wars number 8. I mentioned it earlier. It's the introduction of green space Bugs Bunny. Like, how do we not love weird Star Wars like this? We have, the X-Wing pilot that was a horse. There are some great weird Star Wars moments, and Jackson is having a little bit of a renaissance. We're getting a Black Series Jackson figure coming out sometime soon.
It looks horrible.
But I'm gonna get it because it's a green space Star Wars rabbit. So I just kind of feel like I had to.
You can't talk about Star Wars comics and not mention Jackson. So
that's right. It really is kind of that, go to, as Framey says, it's Bucky O'Hare again. But it is one of those things that, like you said, like if you're talking about comics, especially the vintage ones, like Jackson's going to come up. And of course, with the certain point of view Empire Strikes Back book, Jackson gets to be recanonized and brought back into the fold with the story that's in there. So, and it actually is that the Mike Morrissey story that's in that book? I can't remember now who wrote the Jackson story. I'm blanking as well, but either way, he's in that. So there's a little bit, again, the Jackson Renaissance that comes back into all of this. So we had some fun. We've talked about some Star Wars comic moments. You guys picked some amazing things. And like I said, it really is exciting for me because these are things I don't know about. And so I'm excited to dig more into these and, get some, more things to read that I don't have time to already read. But as we wrap up, first of all, I want to thank both of you guys for hanging out tonight. It really has been a pleasure for me to get to hang out with both of you. I'm big fans of your work, both of you. And so again, on my level, I just get to have fun on a Sunday night and talk to cool Star Wars people. Alex Robinson, what do you guys have coming up? I know you're still working your way through Last Jedi on Star Wars Minute. Is there anything else that you can plug that you've got that you're working on?
Just Star Wars Minute. We just it's our daily show. We just wrapped up Canto Bight, or we're in the home stretch of Canto Bight. The Fantheers are racing to the finish line, and I still do Godfather Minute. We're up to Godfather Part 2, so people should check that out. You can find links to all this stuff at my website, alexrobinson.fun.
Absolutely. Please check out alexrobinson.fun. He's also on Twitter at arobtwit and Star Wars Minute. You can check all of those out. Now, that's a perfect segue to Alex Segura, because when I interviewed Alex Segura the first time, one of the stories that made me laugh was about Alex Segura's introduction to The Godfather.
You met him?
Yeah,
No.
I met Mario Puzo. No, yeah, it was. I read the book when I was 8.
Wow.
Probably way too early to be reading something like that. But then it was a huge influence, because the novel itself is, I'm sure you know this, is so pulpy compared to the movie, which is very regal, and, it's violent. It's a mob film, but it treats the mafia as royalty. Yeah, they classed up the joint. But the book is it's pretty down and dirty crime novel. So, and it was one of the first times I remember being completely shocked, because the novel sets Sonny up to be, he's going to take over for Vito, and he's going to be the next Godfather. I shouldn't feel bad about spoiling a movie from 1972, but when Sonny gets shot up in the toll booth, I was completely shocked. We could probably talk about The Godfather for an hour if we wanted to.
That's right. Let's do that again sometime coming up. But in the meantime,
I've
Alex
even
Segura,
read those the sequel novels or whatever they
are. So what are you working on right now? I know I mentioned up top you've got something that you're doing, I think, with NPR and this comic book. Is that right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so NPR has a show called Planet Money, which is their kind of finance podcast where they introduce, economic concepts in a fun, entertaining way. And one of the things they did was intellectual property and comic books. They wanted to buy a superhero to basically merchandise it and become multimillionaires. And in my role at Archie, I let them know that no company would sell them a superhero. I mean, there's just too much potential there. You're just one good story away from a hit character or IP. So what they did instead was they pulled a character from the public domain, which just means it's a character that was published years ago, but the copyright and the trademark have lapsed, so anyone can use that concept. And they picked a character called Microface, who has a huge audio helmet and literally uses audio waves to fight criminals. And then they asked me to write the comic. So I'm writing the comic. Jerry Ordway, who is a legendary comic book superhero artist, redesigned the character. And Peter Krause is doing the interiors. Peter has done a bunch of stuff from like Archie 1941 to Power of Shazam to so many other things. But we're treating it like a legacy character. And so this is the grandson of the original Microface. And they've done a whole series of episodes on this, which has been really cool. And it's been kind of neat because it taps into a non-traditional, I guess, comic audience. Like the NPR audience maybe aren't comic book fans, but they're picking up this book. So it's kind of a new way to tap into people that aren't like your Wednesday warriors that are going to comic shops. Aside from that, I just sent my next book, Secret Identity, to Copy Edit. So it comes out early next year from Flatiron Books. And it's a murder mystery set in 1970s New York in the comic book industry. You follow this woman. She moves from Miami to New York to work in comics. And she gets a job as a secretary at this, third-rate fictional comic book company. And her boss doesn't let her do any writing. So she ghostwrites this character with a colleague, and it becomes a huge hit. And nobody knows she's written it. And then her colleague is murdered. So she has to basically solve the murder of her friend to because she feels bad. It's her friend, but also to kind of reclaim this character. And it's called Secret Identity. I'm really excited for people to read it. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So that's the big stuff. And the Dusk Kickstarter, which just closed out a couple weeks ago, and we got funded. So now we have to do the work.
That's awesome. Well, tons going on. That all sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The Black Ghost collection comes out May 5th. So
okay.
It'll be the print edition of the superhero comic book we did for Comixology Originals. So that comes out on Wednesday.
Outstanding. I'm going to link up in the audio version of the show notes all the different stuff that you guys are doing. We want everybody to come find you, check that out, get involved however they can. As I've said already, thank you both so much for being on the show tonight, hanging out, sharing your Star Wars stories, your comic book stories. This is truly a treat for me to get to do this. Everybody that's watching, thank y'all so much for hanging out tonight. Again, one more congratulations to Steve and Olivia on the birth of their new baby. Shout out to Matt. Thank you for the cameo, the Taylor Gray. That was so much fun for me. Really enjoyed that. It really made my week. And to everybody, I hope you have a fabulous Star Wars Day on May the 4th. And until we get together again next week, may the Force be with you always.